You know, folks, I'm sure a lot of people have always asked the question. The question of, and this is a question that's probably been talked about for the past decade, if not more so. And that is, what is a furry? What is a furry? And most importantly, what is up with the furry fandom? Or what is the furry fandom? What is this furry community? What are these furries about? What is the point behind all this? Well, not that long ago, well, actually a few years ago, I talked about this. I talked about how people like to put on costumes, the fursuits, if you will. And they like to sometimes put on those costumes when they get home after a hard day at work and just let the reality of the real world that they just came from, that they just spend a day working in, by putting on that suit, that costume, that fursuit, if you will, and becoming something else. They allow that real world, they allow all the problems, all the stress of that real world, of that workday, to just go away, dissolve, melt away into nothing, and thus they allow themselves to start living life as the character they are dressed up as. Now, some people might consider that weird. And, people would have a right and an opinion to that. But what some people have to understand is it's kind of like being an alter ego. You know, when everybody looks at these versions of, these, it's kind of a play on the word fusion, but it's more like versions. Basically, when they see these versions pop up on the internet, they too will ask the question, well, what is up with it? Well, what's up with a version, if you will, is it's basically a furry anthropomorphic avatar or drawing of you, of yourself, but as the furry, as the animal you feel that you are inside, or that you could relate to, and you feel best represents you, but also feel like that's your spiritual animal as well. For example, no offense, ladies, no offense, if you will, no offense, but some women out there, when they create versions of themselves, not only on paper and in stories, but even going as far as to create the costume as well, they will sometimes go with a fox, or in female terms, a vixen, to be the representation of what they would be like if they were an anthropomorphic animal. That would be the representation. That would be the character they can best relate with, or they feel is their spiritual animal. But sometimes it's not just vixens, if you will. Sometimes it could be rabbits, maybe even cats. But it's basically overall the animal that best represents them. Now, it doesn't mean that women always have to choose those animals. They could choose a variety. And that's all up to what animal they feel best represents them. Sometimes they could dress up as a hawk or an eagle. They could dress up as a horse or an anthropomorphic horse. And the list could go on, as an anthropomorphic lioness. You get the idea. Whatever they feel best represents whatever they feel best represents them in an anthropomorphic way. in kind of a spiritual animal way, you know, that's basically the furry or the animal they choose to be represented by these versions, if you will. And sometimes it's not just a big animal. Sometimes it could be an amphibian, like a turtle, a lizard of some kind, or even a rodent like a mouse or a bat. You know, it all depends on what the woman or the man chooses best represents them as their version, as their anthropomorphic self. And as I said before, there will be people that will even go as far as to actually create themselves, or through time, or commission, I should say, people to create anthropomorphic fursuits of the versions, so that they can wear that costume, that fursuit, if you will, like I mentioned at the beginning, to escape reality after a stressful day at work. You know, as I mentioned, some people might know about this person on YouTube. Rabbit in the Room is an individual who, I believe it's a she, I really do. She will put on different version costumes of different characters, some original, some new, some original characters, some familiar characters. You know, she'll put these costumes on and she'll go in front of the camera, or even film along with some friends, herself and even them prancing around, walking around town in these costumes. And sometimes like I said, she'll even go on camera and silently kind of do a video for who knows how long. But she doesn't do it, as herself. She does it as the character she's dressed up as. And that's the truth. Now, one question a lot of people always have is, even if they know about the furry fandom and they accept it, even though they know about the furry fandom and they accept it, one question they always have is, why do men and women sometimes choose different genders to dress up as? Like, why does sometimes a man who could be straight and married and have kids and all that, why would he choose to dress up as a female anthropomorphic character? Or why would a woman who could be, again, married, have kids and all that, decide to dress up as a male anthropomorphic character? Well, you see, that's all depending on how they feel. Sometimes, in my opinion, they do it just for fun, so they can walk in the other's shoes. You know how they always say, how the old saying is between a man and a woman, how that old question or saying is, try walking a mile in his or her shoes. Well, basically, in my opinion, when a man or a male decides, hey, I'm going to dress up as a female anthropomorphic character for a convention or whatever, it's their way of not just walking a mile in a female's shoes, but walking a mile in the female proportion of a body, even if it's anthropomorphic, in my opinion. Same with the female perspective. They'll do the same thing. They'll use the anthropomorphic, the fursuit, if you will, to the male fursuit that they would put on to walk a mile in the male's perspective, in the male proportion and perspective. Even, like I said, if it's just for a convention or if it's just for just for whatever. And they'll do it. And that's their choice. That's their choice. Now, one thing though that some people always ask is, why do people when did this all begin? When did this whole furry fandom, this furry community, this furry fascination, whatever, when did this all begin? And, you would have to go on the internet, but I have to say it had to begin back in the mid to late 90s, in my opinion, from what I've seen. It could have been a lot earlier, but from what I've seen, it had to be around between the mid to late 90s. And the reason I say that is because this was at a time when social media was just really starting to take off. We didn't have no Facebook. MySpace was probably just a thought in progress, if you will. We didn't have no YouTube. We didn't have no Twitter. All we had was email. That's all we had. All we had was email, and we had maybe chat services, and that's it. And it was through these emails and these chat services that, in a sense, the furry community became more well known. As a matter of fact, as time went on with the internet, you would have all these message boards popping up, like Yahoo groups and all that, that would allow for people of the furry community, or the furry fandom, to reach out and let each other know that, hey, you're not alone in this. There's dozens of us, there's thousands of us, there's hundreds of us out there, maybe millions of us out there that are furry, that are part of this furry community, that are just like you. So, in my opinion, that's when I think the furry fandom and community really started taking off. And if I'm wrong, somebody let me know. Somebody out there let me know. But in my opinion, that's when it really started to take off. Because I'm not saying that the furry fandom wasn't around before this. It was. There's probably no doubt that it was. But it really didn't start to take off. It didn't really start to take off until about, like I said, the time the internet really started to take off and social media started to take off. That's when everything started to come into play. That's when things started to really go in a direction no one would ever expect. So with that all said, I think another question people have is, why are some people kind of not ashamed but kind of reluctant to let it be known that they're part of the furry community, the furry fandom? Why are they reluctant? I think it's mainly because of the fact of who they might hang around with at times outside of the community, but it's another reason too, and it's called family. Now, there are some families that will accept the fact that their son, their daughter, their in-laws, and all that are part of this community, and they're cool with it. They are totally cool with it. But then again, there are some families out there that may not be too accepting of it. You might have a family that'll be against this and say, well, and basically come out and say, well, what's these people's problem? They go around dressing up like these furry animals out of a cartoon series. What's the problem? This is freaking weird. And you could be the only person in your family that's a part of that community, and you wouldn't want them to know that you are, because then they might get on you. And that's basically sometimes why some people are reluctant to come out and say, yeah, I'm part of the furry community. I mean, can you imagine if your family was like what I mentioned? They were against this. They never understood it. They found it weird. And you would come out and say, speaking of which, I would like to let you guys know I am part of it. And what do you think the reaction would be? The reaction would be like, what? I'll tell you what kind of reaction you would get, maybe, in my opinion. You'd get a reaction of, what? What did you say? What came out of your mouth? That's the kind of reaction you would get. That's the kind of reaction you would get. It's kind of like with the brony community, even to this day. The brony fandom for MLP FIM is probably the biggest it could ever get it for a fandom in just 4 years. In just 4 years, it's bigger than I think they could ever imagine. And for the fandom, and even though it's huge and it's very well known, there are still groups of people out there that will look at the brony community and they will say that they are nothing but a bunch of weirdos. That, yeah, they might be normal and everything to others, but they're weirdos. They're like in a girls' show. They should just wake up and realize it's a girls' show, move on. But that's the thing, they can't. There's a connection there that no one can explain. And that's the same thing with furries. That's the same thing with the furry fandom, the furry community. And nowadays with social media like Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, you have people at least coming out and saying that they are proud to be part of this community. I go on YouTube, and like I say, I see someone like Rabbit in the Room. Heck, I even discovered Play for Cinema, and it's basically a channel that basically one of its main features is they do furry girl profiles, and they basically pick out a character. That they feel they want to profile, they feel is worthy of profiling that month. And there's so many out there that even though this thing's at, 20, 27, 28 episodes, 29 episodes, it's still got a lot. There's a whole bunch of female furry characters that they can still work with. And that's a fact. That's a fact beyond fact. It really is. It truly is fact beyond fact. And I think above anything, these are outlets that allow people like the furry community, like the bronies, to come out and at least say that they are part of it. Because they know, in a sense, that their family members or friends or whatever that may be against it may not go on YouTube that much and look up their channel or look up what they're into. That they'll just go on Facebook or YouTube or wherever to look up what they want to. That they won't bother to look up their channel and see what they're into. Or look up the Facebook group and see what they're into. Because, in a sense, social media, in my opinion, even though it's very open to everybody, still is smart enough to allow certain communities and fandoms to be close-knit to the point that they don't want any trouble started. They don't want people coming in and, cyberbullying them because of what they're into. Now, like I said, this is crazy to say. And like I said, back when the furry fandom really took off, in my opinion, back in the mid to late 90s up to the early 2000s, thanks to the internet, in a sense, thanks to social media, before then, yeah, the communities were out there, but they were not well known. And there were people that were probably, fans of furries as well, but the thing is they couldn't come out and say anything because they weren't sure if they were the only ones. They couldn't be sure if they were the only ones or not. They weren't sure, But I'll tell you this, for anybody that wonders who could have been like one of the founding people behind the furry community, non-character-wise, I think if you were to look at any founding people, non-character-wise, behind the furry community, they helped take it to that level. you have to look at Eric Schwartz. Eric Schwartz is a guy that used to work for Amiga, a computer brand and all that, I believe. And he used certain characters at that time to help promote Amiga. And even after Amiga's unfortunate demise, I believe, branched them out elsewhere. Some of his most well-known characters are Amy the Squirrel, Sabrina, Sabrina Online, which came around the mid-90s, Zigzag, Khalees the cat, Flip the Frog, which is his take on the classic black and white Flip the Frog, which is not just his take, but a more updated version, and several other characters, like Thomas, who came in and became the permanent love interest, future husband of Amy. And you had Sheila, the list goes on of characters he created, or sometimes even updated, like Flip the Frog, or Flip the Frog, I should say. But here was something that I think when Eric Schwartz created these characters, and he even did some animated shorts for him, which I believe also laid the foundation for what would be a huge furry fandom community. The one thing he did with these characters is not only did he take inspiration from things like, let's say, Tiny Toons and Animaniacs later on, but he also did